Hello, everyone, and welcome to HJP's seminar on Social Security planning. Uh, Probably not my favorite topic, but it's one that, if done right, can make a meaningful difference in your retirement. Uh, the main reason I say that is it's kind of most of the time the starting point of, I would say, 90% of individuals I come across, they retire and turn on Social Security immediately. So it's not that the Social Security is the end all, but it's also lined up with the trigger point. And that point represents this is the moment that I believe I can retire with the budget I want, adjusting for inflation, and I'm not going to run out of money. So that decision is the big one. So the fact that they tend to go hand in hand most of the time is why I try to do a lot of Social Security seminars. Uh, if you have any questions during the presentation, there's a little raise your hand feature at the bottom of the Zoom. Feel free to raise your hand. There's also a chat feature. And of course, as you're digesting all the information, if you have any follow up questions tomorrow, give me a call, shoot me an email. Happy to walk through it. With that, let's get started. So, what do I want to go over tonight? Tonight, you're going to have a fundamental understanding of the 101s when it comes to Social Security. Two, what are the six or seven things that I believe you need to think about before you make a decision, and then possible next steps for yourselves. So let's get the fundamentals in place. So who do we have here? This is Miss Ida Mae Fuller. Ida is the original. She is the very first individual to have ever received a check from the Social Security Administration. Now, as far as I know, she has the greatest return on investment that I've ever heard. So Ida Mae put into the Social Security system for less than a year before she starts getting paychecks or payments from Social Security. And at the time, in 1940, you were eligible to get your Social Security check at 65 years old. Can anyone guess what life expectancy was in 1940? 60 years old. So you were dead for 5 years before you were eligible for getting the benefits. Ida Mae pulled a fast one. She actually lived to 100 years old. So I don't know exactly what her return on investment was, but I'm sure it is phenomenal. So how does one become eligible for the Social Security retirement benefit? Social Security disability benefits are different. I'm not going to go over them tonight. That's more of a situation. If you have something that applies, we can have a follow-up conversation. But this is just pertaining to Social Security retirement benefits. So to be eligible for Social Security, you must receive 40 quarters. Every year that you work, you can get up to 4 quarters. So long story short, if you work for 10 years, you are now eligible for Social Security benefits. Now, everyone's benefits are different. So just because you clock in 10 years, it's not going to be the same as someone who clocked in 35 years who was a high earner. But you will get something if you clock in the 10 years. Two, like I just mentioned, the 35 years is what they factor into the equation. So if you think all the way back to when you were in high school and you had, a dozen homework assignments and you got A, B, A, B, A, B, and then you didn't do three, zeros really drag down your average. So again, it's using your 35 highest working years. Now, this is something that has come up a lot recently. So, the sustainability of Social Security. We're going to take a couple minutes on this right now. For one, this is what I'm about to say is my personal belief. If I knew the answer to this, I'd probably be a rich person. Uh, as of right now, the Social Security Trust Fund, there is a separate set of assets in the government for the Social Security system. It's not supposed to be a general obligation of the funds of the United States. This Social Security Trust Fund is supposed to run dry, and it moves around a little bit, somewhere between 2033 and 2035. At which point, we have roughly 80 cents on the dollar for every dollar we will be bringing in through working FICA wages, and we're only going to send out 80 cents on the dollar. again, this is my personal belief. We've seen this over the last few elections. It is very, very hard to change the entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. It's also very painful for any politician to try and raise taxes, especially taxes on the middle class and the lower class. So, what does that mean? And we also have the baby boomers, the biggest generation in that retirement phase right now. So, the odds of something meaningfully changing Social Security, where all of a sudden your paycheck's going to go down 15, 20%, I do not see it. Um, I think that would be political suicide, whoever proposed it. Um, Now, the difference being is I believe you will get it, but the percentage of your budget that income is going to be able to provide is going to continue to go down. So, what does that mean? What I'm really describing is inflation. That the government has two options: either cut your benefits or raise your taxes to balance the budget a little bit better, or keep kicking the can down the road by running deficits and our national debt growing. I believe they're going to do the latter, or at least they've consistently done that for a long period of time now. So, in saying that, when they're continuing to print money, they're diluting the currency. So, inflation and your Social Security benefit, I think inflation is going to go at a faster pace than what you're going to get from Social Security. What that means is if you went back 20 years ago, let's say the average middle class family, I'm just making up a scenario now, they were going to get their two Social Securities, and maybe they have a little bit of retirement savings, maybe a little bit of pension, but the Social Securities might have been able to pay 50% of their budget needs to maintain their lifestyle. Over time, because Social Security is not going to keep up with inflation, they're going to give it to you, but it's just going to be less meaningful. So, where was 50% of your budget, maybe it only will allow for 40% of your budget, so on and so forth. On top of Medicare premiums come out of your Social Security benefits, and those are going up at a faster pace than what Social Security. So again, I think you'll get it, but it's just going to be less and less meaningful over time. That is my hunch. Time will tell on that scenario. Okay. So how is Social Security calculated? To come up with your full retirement, I'm sorry, your primary insurance amount, that is the amount you're going to receive at your full retirement age. It used to be everyone's full retirement age was 65. Then in the 80s, because there was another time where Social Security was running dry, they tweaked it, which they can also do now. So it used to be, like I said, everyone at 65. Now they tweaked it somewhere between 65 and 67, depending on the year of your birth, is your full retirement age benefit. So anyone born in 1960 or later, 67 is your full retirement age. So how do they calculate your primary insurance amount? Again, that's the amount you receive at your full retirement age. It is your earnings. So someone who clocked in making 100 grand for 35 years is going to have a higher benefit than someone clocked in 50 grand a year for 35 years. Two, your years worked. We were discussing this earlier. If you only work 25 years, you have 10 zeros dragging down your average. And to a lesser extent, age. So, for example, if your full retirement age of 66 or 67 has a slight change to your primary insurance amount. The main meat and potatoes is how long you worked, aka getting up to the 35 years, and your earning wages. So, something to keep in mind: everyone is eligible to turn on their Social Security benefits somewhere between 62 and 70 years old. Every single month you wait, you give yourself a little bit of a raise. The period of time between your full retirement age, in this example here, 67 and 70, your benefit's going to grow 8% a year. That's no joke. There's no 8% CD, so you shouldn't take that lightly. Now, it's not quite that high between 62 and 67. It's about a 7% growth rate. Still a high growth rate. It needs to be factored into your kind of cash flow retirement projections. Now, something to keep in the back of your head is right now, when I run financial plans for individuals, I typically run them to 95 years old. Now, everyone goes, not me. I don't think so. That might be the case. But there's two worlds. You know, as a financial planner, I need to protect against risk. Here's one of the risks. It's kind of a good and bad risk. The risk is you lived a long life. So I need to assume that's going to be the case. If you pass away early, you don't have any money problems. If you're 88 and broke, we have a big problem. So one way of preventing that or lowering the probability of it is delay taking Social Security so you get a little bit more raises before you turn it on. But again, I highly recommend, and then of course, if you have some sort of medical issue and it's just not in the longevity's not in the cards, understood. But you want to start planning if you're doing projections somewhere in the 90s. So at some point, there's got to be a break even. So if you could turn it on 62 and it's a lower amount, or wait all the way to 70 and it's a higher amount, where do they all cross? So as you can tell here, depending on the age, just to pick one age, it's around 80 years old. That's the point where if you turned it on at 62 and got a lower amount, or 70 got a higher amount, that's the point where they cross. So obviously, if you live to 85, you took more money out of the system waiting until 70, as opposed to if you turned it on at 62. So understanding the break even should be a factor. This is one of my favorite slides. Um, I get this all the time about every topic. Well, my cousin, who's really good with money, he recommends I do this. Or Sue from the office is doing this. No two people are living the same retirement. It is, when it comes to Social Security, and I'm going to show you in a little bit, there's 6, 7 different things that I factor into the equation to come up with what I recommend is the highest probability of having success. And if you understand what I just said, all I can do is say, based on your scenario and all the factors, this is the highest probability of bearing the most fruit. Of course, if you were to tell me when you're going to pass away, I'll tell you exactly what to do. Um, but again, be careful. Most people, um, it's pretty rare that I provide a recommendation on turning it on at 62 or 63. Most of the time, it is not the right decision. Maybe for 10% of the people, but as you can tell, between, almost 40% are doing it. Again, might make sense for some people, but when you're going to make a decision, make a educated decision based on the important variables. Don't just make a quick decision by what Sue at the office is saying she's going to. Okay. So let's say you want to continue to work and turn on. So you think, oh, I get a 2-for-1. I'm going to go collect my Social Security at 62 and bank it, and then go to work and let's say make 60,000 a year. Well, the Social Security system thought of that. So if you turn it on before your full retirement age, 62, 63, 64, and you make more than 23,400, they're going to start withholding some of your Social Security benefit. So for every $2 you earn more, they're going to keep one. So that's a horrible deal. So it's a situation where you locked in a reduced benefit for the rest of your life, and you don't even get the reduced benefit. Now, when they withhold it from you, they're not keeping it forever. They'll give it back to you, just spread out over your life, which kind of defeats the purpose. You turned it on early to get access to it early, but now they're going to just spread it out anyway. So normally, and again, I'm about to make a very important point. Social Security, I would say there's a gray area of ages where I think it makes sense for someone. And then a lot of times I can say, take that one off the table. At this age, I would definitely say it's a no. So that's what I try and do most of the time, where I try to say 62, 63 is pretty foolish. 65, 66, 67 might be reasonable in your situation. Because again, if we don't know when we're going to pass away, you're just trying to go with the highest probability. But pretty much set in stone. If you're working, making 30, 40, 50, 60K, and you're trying to turn on early, it's kind of foolish. Now, in the year you turn your full retirement age, they give you much more flexibility. You can earn all the way to 62,000, and it's for every $3 over, they're going to withhold one. Now, just to be clear, you don't get this rule for a full year. You just get it in the calendar year that you turn your full retirement age. So let me give you an example. Let's say your full retirement age is 66 and you turn 66 on June 1st. That means from January 1st of that year till June 1st, when you turn 66, you get a pro rata ability to make that salary of that 62,000. It does not mean you go 1 year prior from your birthday, so June of the previous year, and have that ability. After your full retirement age, you can make as much money as you want, will not have any impact on them withholding your Social Security benefit. So we just went through a scenario of them withholding it. Now we're trying to determine whether they're going to tax it. So how do they calculate whether it's going to be taxable or not? So that's this equation up here. It's your provisional income, which is your modified adjusted gross income, which I'm going to go over in one moment, plus half of your Social Security. Now you can tell these figures below are rather low. They have not indexed these for inflation. So the majority of my clients, it's going to be taxable. That's just the reality. Good and bad, now I don't have to worry about it as I'm trying to plan and do projections, but it's kind of frustrating that they haven't indexed these for inflation. So let's go through an example. And so just to show you what the modified adjusted gross income is, it's pretty much everything. So it's all types of income, and they even add back municipal bond interest. So it is not hard when you add up all the different types of income you have, maybe let's say a part-time job, got half your Social Security, some interest and dividends, maybe a rental, and IRA distributions, and you are quickly above 44,000. And just to be clear, it's saying the percentage of your benefits that are taxable. So to run an example, let's say, just to use a round number, your Social Security was 10 grand, and that put you into the 85% bracket here. So what that means is your Social Security is 10 grand, 85% of 10 grand is $8,500. That gets added on to your taxable income, and then you'll pay based on your tax bracket. So let's say your tax bracket's roughly 25%, 25% of the 8,500 or 2,000 and change, that would be the tax you would owe on your 10 grand of benefit. Something to keep in mind is the spousal benefits. So if you're married to someone for longer than a year, they're eligible for a spousal benefit. So you may remember I said to be eligible for your own Social Security benefits, you had to put in 10 quarters. But let's say you were married, and like I said, all you have to be is married for a year, and you never worked a day in your life. You will be eligible for half of the other person's full retirement age benefit. Couple caveats when it comes to spousal benefits. When I just said you'll get half, if you turn on your benefits early at 62, your benefits will be reduced. So it won't be half of the other individual's benefits. The other thing to keep in mind is it doesn't grow past your full retirement age. So if you're going to claim the spousal benefit, you do not wait past your full retirement age. So if your full retirement age is 66 and you think, oh, I'm still getting a 7-8% raise. You are not. Turn it on immediately. Let's say if that pertains to you, you can call Social Security office, and I believe you can get all the way up to 6 prior months. I've had a few clients that had this situation where you can go backwards 6 months and get a lump sum check for a period of time. So again, the spousal benefit is an important factor as you're making a household decision about when the two of you are turning on your benefits, because you should have a cohesive plan based on the two of you of why you're turning it on each at their own age, which ties into the survivor benefits. So as I mentioned before, if you're still working full time, you want to avoid touching it. 2, if you are the higher of the two benefits, you are the one that you would wait. If you were going to turn on one early, turn on the person with the lower of the two benefits because of what's called the widow or survivor benefits. So let's give an example. Let's say person A's benefits is 3,000 Person B's benefits is 2,000, and the person A passes away, person B is going to drop their $2,000 benefit and switch over and take the other person's. So if the higher of the two turned it on early, they're not only reducing it for the rest of their life, but it's also going to reduce the widow or survivor benefit for the rest of the other person's life. So this is where it gets kind of complicated. Let's say person A has some health issues, might not have longevity in the cards, but the other person's family all live to 100 years old. You try and find the break even point. When does it make sense to turn it on? All tough decisions. And like I said, a lot of times I'm giving people recommendations of a gray or a loose couple years that I think it makes sense. Because again, without knowing exactly the date when you guys are going to pass away, um, you're just trying to go with the highest probability scenarios. If you were married for 10 years, someone else can get a benefit off of your benefit. It doesn't have any impact on yours whatsoever. They just use it for the calculation, but it doesn't impact your benefits. Oop. So someone had a question, but looks like they lowered their hands. So the famous example there is Mr. Johnny Carson, who was married to three different individuals for longer than 10 years each. Three women were getting benefits off of his. Again, it doesn't have any impact on yours, but that just gives you a little bit of idea how it works. Now, another scenario where it might help you make the decision of turning Social Security on earlier is if someone's trying to get benefits off of yours. So if your spouse is trying to get a benefit off yours, or kids. So if you had kids later in life and you have a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, they're eligible for a Social Security benefit if you were to retire and turn on your benefits. So, that might be $1,000 a month that you're not going to get back. So your break even point, maybe instead of being 80 years old, might be 83 because we're getting two Social Security benefits. So it might make sense to turn it on earlier. One caveat I did not bring up: widows are the only individuals that are allowed to turn on benefits at the age of 60. And they are the only individuals that can go back and forth. So what does that mean? You can turn on your widow benefit and allow yours to continue to grow at that 7 to 8%, and then later in life switch to the widow benefits. You cannot do that with the spousal benefit. When you try and turn on your benefits, Social Security is going to give you the higher of the two. If your spousal benefit, which was half of your partner's benefit, or yours, whatever's the higher, that's what they're going to give you. You can't go back and forth. So what you're looking at here is if I'm sitting down with someone new and I'm trying to guide them on what makes the most sense for turning on Social Security, these are the things I'm running through in my head. One, what is their health like? What is their spouse's health like? Is longevity in the cards, or do we think that they might pass away a little bit earlier? It's certainly a factor. Two, what's your family history like? If everyone in your family lived to 94, that should factor into your equation. Three, current market conditions. So right now, the stock market is pretty close to all-time high. A lot of investments have done phenomenal. So the old rule of thumb, you want to sell high and buy low. Well, this might be a time where I say, well, I know Social Security is growing at 7 to 8%, and all my investments have done phenomenal. I think the stock market is really expensive right now. You know what? I'm going to use this to take a little profits off the table from the market, and I'm going to let my Social Security grow. And if 6 months later markets crash, now I want to leave my investments alone, I might turn on Social Security. So current market conditions as a big factor in when I tell people to turn on their Social Security benefits, which also goes hand in hand with your risk tolerance. If markets are high, but you're sitting in the bank, well, then markets are not that big of a deal. But if I know your risk tolerance is you're a CD money market bank person, and let's say interest rates go back down a little bit and you can only get 2% or 3% on your money, and Social Security is growing at 7, 8%, seems kind of foolish to not touch the thing growing at 2, 3% to touch the thing growing at 7, 8%. Again, factor in the equation. Your spousal benefits. So, like I said, this is a decision you should be making with your spouse as one cohesive strategy. Retirement assets, that goes back to what I originally started, that most of the time people turn on Social Security and retire at roughly the same time. So if you're coming into retirement a little light and you're not where you need to be, then delaying Social Security is a fantastic way of increasing your budget in retirement. Maybe you push it off a little bit, which ties into the most important factor in all of this. At the end of the day, you need to be able to prove that this is going to work. So that's the last one here, your cash flow projections. So I'm going to touch it on real quick. So one, if anyone wants a Social Security analysis where we can plug in, hey, let's run scenarios of turning it on at 62, your full retirement age at 70, or we can create a hybrid where maybe one person turns it on early, one person turns it on later. And we run hypotheticals based on, let's say wife dies at 95, husband dies at 90. We can run projections to kind of give you a compare and contrast to see, what am I giving up if I turn it on early versus turning it on late. Again, happy to run that scenario for people. And again, that the most important thing, like I just said, is the cash flow analysis, where we're saying, all right, in our hypothetical here, Kevin's going to retire next year. Nancy's going to work a few more years. We're going to have Kevin turn it on early, Nancy wait a few more years, and we're going to have one pension in the equation, give us an idea of what our income looks like. That's this column here. Planned distributions. These are what's required by the government, called your RMDs. And that gives us our total inflows, or guaranteed inflows. And then we have the lifestyle we're trying to afford over time. So let's say this, starting at retirement, we want to spend 166,000 a year and keep up with inflation, 171, 177, so on and so forth. Well, based on that lifestyle and how much we're going to save from now until retirement, our red column here is just the additional amount we need to take from our investments to maintain our lifestyle, to pay that budget. What we're trying to see is this column all the way to the right. This is our liquid money, and we want to see how long does our money last. So we see the ages all the way here to the left. And so what we see is we go red at around 93 and 84 years old. So we have a big problem. There's an age gap there. Always makes retirement planning a lot harder. We have someone where we're going to run out of money at 84 years old. We can't have that happen. So we have to kind of go back to the drawing board. And what I always tell people is I don't tell anyone no. I tell them you get 5 or 6 dials that you get to play with. 1, when you retire. 2, your budget in retirement. 3, how much you're going to save up until retirement. 4, how much risk you're taking in your investments. And 5, whether you can do some part-time work or not. And you can say 6, it maybe you want to downsize or go out of state. These are the dials you got to play with. But we got to move into the spot where we have us black all the way through to your mid-90s. That means you have a successful plan. So, I don't recommend say I'm going to take this Social Security at this age. Okay, fair enough. But can you prove it with a cash flow that you're going to be fine? This is what I highly recommend everyone do. Now, this is a slide I'm starting to go over all in all with every single presentation that I do. I'm a little bit more numbers, logic, spreadsheet type of guy. But what I've seen over and over is, everything we just went over is well and good and helps you create a logical, reasonable plan, based on numbers and finance. You need to have a plan for transitions. Transitions are emotional, sometimes scary. When emotions are up, it's hard to make the right decision. I've seen it over and over and over again. Money's not lost between 62 and 63 or 72 and 73. It's lost by making quick snap decisions because something big just happened. You might have become a widow, elder care planning, someone passed away unexpected. Everyone tends to plan for the retirement transition, but the widow is a big one. A lot of times one person's making a lot of the decisions with regards to the retirement plan in the household. The other person, might not be part of all the conversations, but making sure you're creating one cohesive plan, because at some point someone's going to be making emotional decisions, and hopefully you have a plan in place that we could just follow the steps. So tonight is, I consider, part one. You got a fundamental understanding how the Social Security system works. Two, what are the 6 or 7 things you should be thinking about before you make that decision? Three, an understanding that you should be able to prove it to yourself. Based on that cash flow, we have a successful plan. You do that, you know, everything else is in God's hands. All we can do is whatever's the highest probability thing. How life plays out, that's out of our hands. uh, in saying that, if anyone has any questions, again, you can use the raise your hand feature. There's a little chat box. I'll certainly leave a few moments if anyone has any questions. Okay, no worries. That must mean I did everything perfect, which I don't think is the case. But again, everyone has access to my email, my phone number. Give me a call. Happy to go through any scenario that you have any questions on. But thank you so much, and I hope you found this worthwhile.